Hi there, I'm Dave Thomas with CDK and welcome to CDK Live. We have a session on the EV transition and if it's stalled or not as we move forward in 2024. Joining me, Sam Abolsamade from Guidehouse Insights. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me, Dave.
Yeah, we've known each other quite a while.
Long time, probably a good 15 years or so.
That's about that long, I think you're right. And over that time, you and I have been in a lot of electric vehicles. In my past, I reviewed EVs. You still review EVs all the time. You just drove a new one this week.
Yep.
At the dealer level, just to level set for everyone, there's all this conversation about, the decline of EVs maybe, but brass tacks, the future, EVs are inevitable, aren't they? They're not going away.
No, EVs are not going away, but they're not. We're not going to get to 100% EVs as fast as some people would like. Certainly not as fast as some people were projecting. If you go back just 2 or 3 years when we first started seeing this ramp up, all manufacturers announcing plans for all these new EVs, building new battery plants, retooling assembly plants, and we had most of the major OEMs announcing targets of getting to 50% EV adoption by 2030, and some like GM. And this is for North America. Globally, It's actually even faster.
Correct.
And in other parts of the world, they are getting there at a much faster rate than we are here. But GM, had a publicly stated target of being all electric by 2035. We're not going to hit those targets, but that doesn't mean that EVs are dying, or that they're even necessarily declining.
Yeah, it's interesting, and one of the things we're seeing, it seems like there's a slowdown, but it's kind of hard to tell. But in our research, we did a paper called EV Confusion Carries On, and we surveyed over 1,000 car buyers. They were buying gas, EV, or hybrid, right? So it was a mix of all of them. But whoever you asked, whatever they were looking to shop for, every single one thought EVs are just more expensive than anything else, more expensive to buy, and they even thought, even the EV shopper thought they were more expensive to maintain. Do you see that out there, that this idea that they're very expensive, and is that a barrier? Is that a real barrier?
So, yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things to unpack there. First of all, yes, EVs are more expensive to buy today. Certainly most EVs are. The average price of EVs is higher, although the gap has closed quite a bit in the last year. In 2022, it was particularly bad in 22 when the war in Ukraine started. We had a spike in prices of materials like nickel and lithium that led to battery prices going up. And so we saw a lot of price increases on EVs. And at one point, the average transaction price of EVs in the United States was about $66,000 versus $48,000 for the overall vehicle fleet. That gap has closed a lot. It's down to about 53,000 ATP for EVs now. But they are still expensive, and the big challenge is that there are few, if any, actually really affordable EVs. In that $25,000 to $35,000 price range. There's not a lot of offerings, so that's a problem. And we've also got a number of other factors that are contributing to the affordability problem. It's not just sticker price; it's also the interest rates, the economic, some of the macroeconomic issues that we've got. With high interest rates, you're going to have higher monthly payments on a car, whatever you buy. And up until the beginning of this year, we also had the challenge with the IRA tax credits. When we transitioned from the old tax credit scheme to the IRA program, that made things more challenging because suddenly a lot of vehicles that were previously eligible were no longer eligible because they weren't assembled in North America. And then we've also seen vehicles drop off the list because of the content requirements for batteries.
Right.
And so, at the beginning of this year, those a lot of vehicles that were eligible last year are no longer eligible because they've got some components or some battery minerals that are coming from places like China, which are verboten under the IRA. So, that has made it more challenging to have affordable EVs. Now, on the plus side, beginning of this year, we also had finally made the transition to point of sale for the tax credits. Because one of the problems with the tax credit program was always that you had to buy the car for full MSRP, and then the following year, when you file your tax return, you'd apply for
Right.
that $7,500. Now you can get that right at the point of purchase. So the old system, it didn't have any impact on your monthly payment, which, as we all know, is a big factor in
It's
people's
huge.
buying decision. Now you can get that $7,500 off at point of sale at many dealers, and so it reduces your monthly payment. And hopefully this year we'll see interest rates starting to come down.
We hope.
So hopefully the affordability challenge will make more progress on that.
Yeah, and we're hearing that we were just in a session yesterday and heard from dealers that day one on January 1st that the IRS was actually picking up phone calls from dealers to help them with these sales. And the other big thing with any government regulation has loopholes, and there's a huge one in the
Leasing.
EV tax credit, which is leasing, which had seen a complete downturn during the pandemic across the board. And so the lease numbers for these things are going through the roof. So totally agree there. So if we get the affordability thing out of the way, let's just say,
That's just one piece of the puzzle.
EVs are all super affordable now. That's great. The other one is the charging infrastructure everyone
Yeah.
points to. Now, I always advocate, there's 50% of people that have garages. Put the darn EV in a garage. You'll never, worry about it except for that one, road trip a year you do, right? And maybe you have a second car to do that with. Or you can rent another car for a couple $100 and don't put miles on your car. But for mass adoption, we're going to need charging outside of the home. What's the state of that? There's a lot of, I think they just put in some of the first as part of a new government program, just started opening. But where are we at? Is it just still at the very beginning, or how robust are we?
We're not quite at the beginning, but we're nowhere near the end yet.
Okay.
So it's still
It's a
very
good,
early
good
on.
metric.
Yeah,
Good measurement.
Still, we're maybe 15-20% of the way to
Wow.
where we need to be,
Okay.
and maybe not even that far along. So yeah, charging. As you mentioned, half of people can charge at home, but the other thing that needs to be considered is that most people that drive cars don't buy new cars. You sell about
That's
three
true.
times as many used cars every year in the United States as new cars. Again, it's part of the affordability thing. Most people can't afford new cars.
Right.
They buy used cars. And when you look at the population, people that are driving used cars, a much higher percentage of them are in a situation where they don't have dedicated off-street parking, or they may be renters, they may be living
Yep.
in apartments or condos, or living in older urban neighborhoods where they have to park on the street, park curbside. So there's a lot of different situations, or even if they have off-street parking, they may be renting a home, single-family home. They may not be homeowners, they may be renters. And so they may not be able to get a charger installed. Or even if they own their own home. If it's an older home, the cost of installing a charger, if you still have an older home with a 100 amp breaker panel in there,
Yeah.
the cost of getting an electrician in there to upgrade that to a 200 amp panel, put in a decent charger, you could be looking at many, many thousands of dollars for that. So having public charging infrastructure to enable more people to utilize EVs, because eventually these new EVs are going to get into the used car market. You
Yes.
get 290 million registered vehicles in the United States. Only somewhere between 15 and 17 million new vehicles a year at best. And so there's a long turnover time, but once those get into the used car market, we need to be able to support those people.
Yeah.
We've got programs like the NEVI program from the infrastructure bill, the 2021 infrastructure bill, that putting $7.5 billion towards DC fast charging infrastructure. But that by itself is not enough, because DC charging, we need to also move beyond the kind of gas station model that we're used to with charging. DC charging is hard on batteries. It also requires a lot of power coming into that charging station. The equipment is much more expensive. Putting in a DC charger, you're looking at anywhere, depending on the power requirements, anywhere from $125,000 to $250,000 each. Whereas a level 240 volt charger, that's at most, for a commercial one, maybe a couple of $1,000s.
Yeah.
And so what we need to do also is have a lot more emphasis on putting in things like curbside charging in neighborhoods, so that people that need access to charging but can't necessarily plug into their home can utilize an EV. The vehicle's still parked overnight, just as if they had the garage. Put in curbside charging. Now you've got a solution that is much more cost effective. The cost of the charging is cheaper, the cost of the equipment's cheaper, and you can support a lot more people.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. And listening to your question, or your answer, sorry, it really made me think, like, a lot of terms, level 2, level 3. One of the big problems with getting EVs into the market is education.
Yeah, it's
And
a
that
huge
was
challenge. Yeah.
so. In terms of education, whose role is that? Is that the OEM's role? Is that the dealer's role? Is it on the shoppers? Like, you should be online figuring this all out yourself. Who should be figuring this out for them?
It's a bit of all of those, but dealers and OEMs are a major part of that. Actually, earlier today, I was sitting down with the CEO of a dealer group, and he said that's one of the things that they're really focusing on with their salespeople at his stores is educating them, training those retail people so that they can educate the consumers. Because one of the goals when you're selling vehicles, you want to make sure that to the degree you can, that you get people into the vehicles that best suit their needs.
Yeah.
Because when you do that, when you get something that fits their lifestyle, their requirements, they're going to be much happier with that vehicle. And then when it's time to replace it, they're going to be much more likely to come back to you for a sale. And so, where you've got that direct contact between the salesperson and the customer, that's a great opportunity to educate that customer. And teach them about, here's what this car can do, here's some of the things that are different from a gas vehicle, here's some of the things that are the same. Actually, another conversation I was having earlier today was with somebody from Turo, who's got an interesting program that they're starting to do now with OEMs, which is to facilitate longer test drives. So, Turo is the peer-to-peer car rental program where you own a car, you can put it on the Turo platform, kind of like Airbnb for cars.
Yeah.
And so what they're doing is they're working with an OEM and working with dealers to enable customers that are maybe interested in an EV, but they're not sure if it's the right fit for their needs, for their lifestyle, or not sure what it's going to take for charging, to enable them to rent an EV from a dealer through Turo, rent it for a few days, a week, a couple of weeks, however long they need, and get used to it, and then be able to ask the questions. But the other thing, from the dealer I talked to earlier is, follow up. So once a customer's bought an EV, is follow up with that customer. A few days, a week, 2 weeks after they've had the vehicle, see what questions they've got, and help them resolve any issues. The other thing we're seeing from most OEMs as well is various programs to go along with the sale of a vehicle to help either provide charging or provide credits towards the installation of charging at home. So there's a lot of things that dealers can do, that OEMs can do, and the customers. Increasingly today, customers do a lot more research than they were doing 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Sure.
Before they go into a dealer, and so take some time to do some reading about what are the features of this car, how far can it go, what are the limitations. But getting seats and butts is probably the single biggest thing.
Yeah.
Or butts and seats, I should say.
Yeah.
Getting butts and seats
Right.
is the biggest thing that actually gets people to really make the decision to buy an EV. Because once you drive one, you're way more likely to actually want to own one.
Yeah, that's a great point. And the other thing you bring up in your conversation, it's like there's a notion out there, and it's been pretty prevalent for a few years among, let's say, automotive and EV enthusiasts, that traditional car dealers don't want to sell EVs. And I don't think there's anything further from the truth. They want to sell these vehicles that are on their lots. They are salespeople. That's what they do. So it's great to hear that they're exploring all these avenues and options to get that done. So speaking of different automakers and OEMs, we don't review cars at CDK. Our clients are spread across every single brand, but you do. So who do you think is doing the EV game the best right now? I mean, there's a lot of talk from the Germans do a very good job. Korean brands. Who's doing it best right now?
Well, I mean, Tesla is obviously the mainstream pioneer in this. And, while I've got a lot of issues with a lot of things Tesla does, one thing that Tesla has absolutely done better than anybody else is the development of that charging infrastructure. Making sure that when people buy a vehicle, they can get it charged, and be able to drive it anywhere they want. Now, as you mentioned earlier, people don't actually take road trips very often. People think, I need a car with a long range for, road
Right.
trips to visit grandma or go to Disney World. And that's true, but it's not as often as most people realize. Most people
Right.
only drive, 80% of daily driving is less than 40 miles a day. But Tesla really did the right thing in terms of the charging experience. And it's not just having the chargers out there, but also making sure those chargers work. And this is where the rest of the industry has really faltered, is in the support for that charging infrastructure. Because if the chargers are sitting there, I was at an event yesterday with an OEM test driving a new EV. And one of the things that sometimes that people like to do when they're on these drive programs is actually take it to a charging station, see how fast it actually charges. Well, at the location we were at, the closest to, this is in Northern California, the closest two DC fast charging stations, one was about 20 miles south in the opposite direction of the drive route. There was one that was closer, but it was an Electrify America station with 4 chargers, of which only one was functional.
Wow.
Yeah. So that, encountering charging stations that don't work is a real issue, and that really turns people off.
Okay.
And that has actually made some people, that have bought EVs decide, you know what, I can't deal with this, and then you get rid of it.
Right.
So, the thing that Tesla has done the best is both having the chargers out there, but making sure they work. And we're starting to see other OEMs, start to make the direct investments now in that charging infrastructure. GM's actually done quite a bit with EVgo.
Yeah.
They've got
Mercedes
the
has
partnership with Pilot Travel Centers to, have chargers, at these travel centers along major highways. And the great thing about that, when you are taking that road trip, when you need to stop to charge for half hour, 45 minutes, you don't want to be just sitting there in the car waiting
Right.
for it to charge. You want some amenities around. You want some place to eat, do some things while the car's charging. And so, location of where you put the charger is an important thing. The joint venture between 7 OEMs to build another network of 30,000 DC fast chargers is great, but again, they have to support them.
Right.
So that support. And then on the product side, companies, Hyundai Motor Group, I think has done a fantastic job. They've got some great products out there. Ford, they've got a couple of products out there, but they're actually really good. GM's got some stuff that's very promising. They've got some challenges in actually building them and getting the software working. And some of the Germans, BMW has done a great job with their EVs. They're very energy efficient, and great performance and very functional. So there's a lot of good stuff out there.
Yeah, it's good to hear. So that's from the automaker side. So when we talk about dealers, I want to end on you giving some advice to dealers. If they're looking at 2024, some dealers outside of California especially are having trouble, selling EVs, and it's a different regional experience, right? The shopper's different, the terrain is different, the weather is different, right? So for 2024, what advice would you give dealers to help them get those EVs sold?
So, as I said earlier, getting those butts in seats is an important part of that. Getting people experience with it. Make sure your staff is trained to understand both the positives and the limitations. Because these vehicles are not perfect, and it's important to not sell an EV to somebody for whose lifestyle or whose needs it's not going to be a good fit for.
Right.
Take the time to really understand what the customer needs, where they live, where they work, and make sure that they are a good fit for an EV today. And then once you do that, do the follow-up, and consider things like like what I mentioned earlier, like what Turo is doing with some dealers. If you've got a dealership, you've got some EVs in inventory, think about making them available through a platform like Turo. And then advertise that you can rent these vehicles, for a few days, week, 2 weeks, and get some experience with them to make sure, to really understand if it is a good fit for the customer. Because that's the best way to really know if it's going to fit your needs and your lifestyle.
That's terrific points. Well, Sam, thank you so much for joining me. Always great to talk EVs with you,
Yeah.
and we'll see you again soon, I hope.
Yeah, absolutely. Good
All
to
right.
talk to you, Dave.
Take care.